Hello all, I'm Connor and welcome to the latest installment of my weekly movie reviews. We're hip deep in January. Awards contenders I, Tonya and Phantom Thread received wide releases this week, as well as 2 disposable action movies and a romantic movie, those being the crime heist Den of Thieves, the war drama 12 Strong, and the country music romance Forever My Girl. Because I want to start this year out on a clean slate, I will be reviewing 2018 movies only, so that means I won't be covering either I, Tonya or Phantom Thread, although you should totally see both because they're really good. I saw I, Tonya in December and was impressed with Margot Robbie's turn as Tonya Harding, and especially Allison Janney as her abusive mother and Sebastian Stan as Tanya's husband. I'm not too keen on either Janney or Stan, but I may have to change my tune after seeing this film, and found its turn from dark comedy to scathing indictment of its audience fascinating. I saw Phantom Thread before checking out the other 3 movies this week, and I'm kind of glad I won't be reviewing it because I'm still processing it. Phantom Thread isn't one of my favorite movies of the year per se, but it's without a doubt one of the greatest of 2017, absolutely deserving its 6 nominations at the upcoming Academy Awards, including Best Picture, as well as Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis, Best Director for Paul Thomas Anderson, Best Supporting Actress for Leslie Mansville, Best Musical Score from Johnny Greenwood, and Best Costume Design. I'm a little upset it got snubbed for Best Sound Mixing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Phantom Thread is a weird, emotionally evocative, intoxicating experience that features excellent work from everyone involved, and that musical score has gotta win the Oscar. Without any further ado, let's get into it, and as always, fair warning, spoilers for everything moving forward. Ever since Clint Eastwood's American Sniper hit its wide release in January 2015 to an opening of $89 million, there's been something of a trend for January to be the place for studios to open their war movies based on various post-9/11 military conflicts in the Middle East. In 2015, we got American Sniper. In 2016, we got Michael Bay's 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. We didn't get one last year, but this year the trend came back with 12 Strong, a 2-hour, 10-minute feature starring Chris Hemsworth, Michael Shannon, Michael Pena, Naveed Negahban, and Trevante Rhodes, which, as the slogan on the poster says, tells the true story of the recently declassified outings of Task Force Dagger, aka the horror soldiers in the direct aftermath of the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. 12 Strong is going to be a bit of a tricky movie to review because, by its nature, there are going to be 2 drastically opposed political responses just on principle. I get where both sides are coming from, but in all honesty, I have no interest in weighing in on this political issue, much less on the internet, and am only seeking to provide my thoughts on the film in my experience of watching it. If that bothers you, then don't worry, because I'm sure there are about 100 reviews that can validate your beliefs no matter which side of the issue you stand on. Anyway, 12 Strong is a movie I fell right down the middle of. I found it to be rather well constructed on a production and directorial level, liked several of the performances, particularly Negahban, Rhodes, and Shannon, thought it presented some neat ideas, but found the movie to be mostly boring in its repetition and its strict adherence to formula. To start with the good, let's dig deeper into the production. Usually in January, I expect theatrical releases to more resemble high-end television or Netflix productions, competent but strained by budget. Usually this can be found in blown-out skies, light coming in from windows to be blown out, color correction to be lacking so shadows and blacks lack a deep, inky quality, limited blocking and camera movements because of limited sets, etc. But color me impressed to discover that 12 Strong actually looks like a movie. It looks really good for that matter. More like a movie you'd expect to see in April or early August. The costume sets and overall production values look good, and the final climactic sequence that goes on for a good long while never looks like its budget is running out. For that, I'll commend director Nikolai Fugelsig, whose only other direction credit appears to be a movie on the Sci-Fi Channel called Exfil, so good job, Mr. Fugelsig. As previously mentioned, several performances are really good here. Chris Hemsworth in the lead does some decent work. The material certainly isn't stretching his range, but his character makes the change to have what is referred to as killing eyes at one point in the movie, and that change can be seen on his face. It's not like there's a progression. It is either kind-eyed Chris or killer-eyed Chris, but for the material, that's all fine and good. And for what it's worth, Hemsworth is still a commanding enough screen presence, even if his natural Australian accent can still be heard in his lower register. The standout for sure is Naveed Negahban as General Dostum. the ally connection for Task Force Dagger in Uzbekistan. He delivers a performance which fulfills what we're told about him early on in the movie. He's been a soldier his entire life, he's cautious, he's world-weary, he's set in his ways and customs, and along with all of this, his experienced cynicism is matched with Hemsworth's fresh-faced ambition, and their dynamic is the clear winning ingredient of the film. I just wish there were more of it. The discussions these two men have and the sacrifices they make throughout in joining forces is genuinely thought-provoking and a relatively unique story point as far as recent movies based on contemporary wars are concerned. Trevante Rhodes, who most people, myself included, know from Moonlight, is here in a supporting part, and he stands out in my mind as memorable. He's given something of a kid sidekick, and their dynamic is cute for what it is. Just so long as you never mind that the movie's making light and never questioning the militarization of a 10-year-old youth. Michael Shannon, Michael Pena, William Fichtner, and Rob Riggle are all also here delivering serviceable performances as familiar army archetypes. But the last positive I'll note is the climax. The rest of the action is perfectly average, middle-of-the-road, typical wartime fare that gets a little tedious and repetitive, but the final showdown, while a little on the long side, is rather exciting. Yes, the horse soldiers do come across as superheroes fighting a supervillain with a death machine weapon that can shoot 40 missiles in 20 seconds or so, made complete with his full black attire and big black beard, but the chaos is captured fairly well, and I never called into question the sense of geography. There was good editing, good stunt work, good choreography. I wouldn't call it exhilarating or particularly memorable, but for what it was a good finale to close out what was mostly a boring experience. Which leads me into my problems. My biggest problem with 12 Strong was that it was mostly a boring experience. I've got no beef with formulaic storytelling. The reason we even have formulas is because they've all proven to be effective time and time again. But the rigid formula of the whole story is made all the more tedious when that formula extends to the thin characterization. And because the direction is only alright and also can't elevate this material, 12 Strong never leaves the middle of the road. What can you really say about any of these characters? Chris Hemsworth wants to fight to get home because he's got a wife and child. Michael Pena wants to fight to get home because he's got a wife and child. Michael Shannon wants to fight to get home because he's got a wife and child. These characters are practically interchangeable, and they've all been given the same stock motivation that every soldier character in every war movie has ever been given. I understand that real-life soldiers have to give up their personal lives to be in the Army, Air Force, Marines, etc., and that's hard for everybody, but would it be too much to ask for a little more in any of these characters? Maybe that's why I like Trevante Rhodes and his gun-toting 10-year-old sidekick, because they had a quirk and something to distinguish themselves. Once our soldiers make it home, we only see Hemsworth reunite with his family, and not Michael Shannon nor Michael Pena, and their exclusion from the ending doesn't affect the ending in any way, since they're all so interchangeable. Seeing one reunite with their family is like seeing all three of the men set up having to leave their families reunite with their families. A lot of the opening act is clunky. I personally remember when 9/11 happened. I was young, but I remember how shocked, vulnerable, and angry a lot of people felt. But it's presented here as a supposedly easy way at having us empathize with the central characters and failing. We don't know these people at all, so seeing them respond to 9/11 doesn't mean anything to us since we don't know what 9/11 means to them. Oh man, look how angry Chris Hemsworth is that 9/11 happened. He just kicked over his desk. Oh man, look how angry all these dudes are that 9/11 happened. They're sitting around in a circle mugging while they each take turns dropping F-bombs. It's kind of childish. Once we get to Uzbekistan, the structure becomes formulate a plan of attack against a Taliban-occupied village, horse soldiers call in an airstrike, Taliban and good guys engage in a firefight until the Taliban are defeated. Lather, rinse, repeat. For that matter, the horse soldiers with their allies led by General Dostum are always sneaking up on the Taliban by coming down a hillside, since these occupied villages are all at the foot of a hill. For all I know, they could have shot all of these action scenes on the same hill. The sameness of the environment only adds to the tedious repetition. In the end, 12 Strong is a cut above the usual January offerings in terms of its overall production and boasts a pretty good climax that leaves a good taste in the mouth after what is overall a dull, repetitive war movie that has shards of interesting ideas that should have been pulled more to the front. I'm going to give 12 Strong a 5 out of 10. Last week, I reviewed the action movie Proud Mary, which was directed by Babak Najafi, who also directed the 2016 sequel London Has Fallen starring Gerard Butler. As luck would have it, this week sees the release of the action heist film Den of Thieves, starring Gerard Butler, which is the directorial debut of Christian Gudegast, who also wrote the film and who is also one of the names accredited for writing London Has Fallen. To paraphrase my good friend the Comics Kid 2099, I guess I should tear a corner off my movie buff card because I have yet to see Michael Mann's 1995 crime saga, Heat. From what I understand, Den of Thieves is basically just Heat. Gerard Butler stars as Big Nick O'Brien, the leader of a rough group of Special Forces cops who are all on the trail of a gang of professional thieves led by a man called Merriman, played by Pablo Schreiber, after they hijack an empty armored car. Merriman's gang, which includes a childhood friend played by rapper Jackson 50 Cent Curtis, and a getaway driver played by rapper Ice Cube's son, O'Shea Jackson Jr., among a few others, plan to rob $10,000 from the LA branch of the Federal Reserve, all the while Big Nick and his rough gang of take-no-prisoners cops get closer and closer to hunting them down. It's not uncommon for January to see the release of movies that revolve around cops getting personally involved with crime featuring actors you're familiar with. Just last year we got Sleepless, starring Jamie Foxx, Michelle Monaghan, and David Harbour. Den of Thieves follows suit. Gudegast's debut, taken on its own, is a somewhat ambitious project that is competently put together, features perfectly fine performances from its large ensemble cast, but ultimately fails because Gudegast's reach exceeds his grasp. He maybe got a little too ambitious, and as a result, if I had to wager a guess, I'd say the whole enterprise got too big and sprawling. Things probably had to be cut to fit into an already long 2-hour 20-minute runtime, and Den of Thieves basically falls apart in its third act as it struggles to keep track of its various threads. I'll start with the positives, as I do think there are things to appreciate here, namely the performances and particularly O'Shea Jackson Jr. Nobody's giving the performance of their career, but everyone appears to be committed. Gerard Butler is stuck with the weak link in terms of writing and characterization in this story, but he fills his character out in a respectable way. Little quirks like his always putting food and drink in his face when at all possible are nice. By nature of the story, Pablo Schreiber's Merryman is a rather elusive, mysterious presence whose master plans are kept hidden, and as a result we never feel like we know his character or get that much of a read on him or what he stands for. But Schreiber does what he can at selling the physical part of his character as well as the somewhat subversive intellectual angle whenever he can. But without a doubt, O'Shea Jackson Jr. is the standout of the ensemble as well as the heart and soul of the movie. Jackson is a charismatic screen presence who's best when he plays reserved, quiet, and calm. Once he gets involved with the police, his limitations can be seen when he has to freak out and do some yelling. But he's not awful, it's just noticeably weaker here than in the rest of the movie. After the first hour, this character really starts to fall by the wayside as the heist and central rivalry between Merriman and Big Nick take center stage, which is a bit of a shame, but for that first hour, I found Jackson's character Donnie to be where I was being drawn towards. The big heist that the movie builds towards is actually pretty good. For a movie which features mostly weak editing, this sequence in particular was surprisingly well edited and actually engaged me enough to put me on the edge of my seat. Like 12 Strong, I was impressed to go to a January wide release and see something that actually looked like it was supposed to be in a theater, and not like it was trying to strain its budget every scene. The sound design was crisp and clear, and the digital cinematography didn't possess a cheap quality I'm used to seeing in movies of this caliber, like the aforementioned Sleepless. But to my dismay, that's all I can really say worked for me in this movie. I want to like this movie more than I did because there is more ambition and command of narrative here than the usual crime slog we get this time of year on an annual basis. But if I'm trying to be objective, this story does not hold together very well, and the end result is chaotic, poorly edited, and, well, kinda bad. The biggest problem here in Den of Thieves is how its writer-director uses his real estate. The story feels uneven, and the focus is constantly shifting when it should be lingering, and lingering when it should be shifting. This is tied with the poor approach to character, but put a pin in that because we'll be coming back to it later. The biggest problem here is how the film prioritizes Big Nick and his family drama. I think the impression here was for the traditional good guys to be portrayed more like the bad guys, and for the traditional bad guys to be more sympathetic and fall in line with what are traditionally called protagonists. It's an anti-hero piece. This isn't a new idea, but it's one that can always be mined for analyzing character archetypes, subverting genre conventions, and other uses, but it comes across like we're giving Gerard Butler's character more screen time because he's the biggest star on the poster. Right from the get-go, he's curt at best, rude by default, and often a raging tool who abrasively asserts dominance over everyone he possibly can, be it physical or verbal. I don't like this guy. I don't think I'm supposed to, and the film is doing a very good job at making me not even want to like this abominable jerk. He's got a clear drinking problem, he kidnaps a suspect and holds him hostage in a hotel room with his gang and prostitutes, and then he goes home to his wife and kids who leave him once he screws up and his wife discovers he's a cheating pig. Am I supposed to feel sorry for this loser? Oh no, this violent, abusive, cheating, alcoholic monster who the film has worked overtime for me to detest is getting divorced. Boo-hoo? What's worse is how the subplot keeps coming back in repetitive, overlong scenes only to be dropped entirely in the final 30 minutes. Big Nick gets drunk, tracks down his wife, ruins her evening as he acts like he's a member of the party, all the while intimidating everyone to do exactly as he says. I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to get out of these scenes. Am I supposed to feel bad for Big Nick? Like he's a friend of mine who's embarrassing himself? Am I supposed to feel scared for everybody that Big Nick might violently attack someone? If that happens, then what does this have to do with the rest of the movie at all? Am I supposed to feel bad that this negligent, absent father will have his kids taken away from him? Am I supposed to find Big Nick's drunken antics funny and he's just showing up clowning around? My audience's reaction to pretty much all of Big Nick's family scenes was awkward laughter, and I can't blame them. I was utterly perplexed. And that was no fault of Butler, who I think was doing the best he could at selling these poorly integrated scenes that ate up so much of the film, as many subplots were gaining traction. The last scene we see of Big Nick and his family is when he visits his daughter at school when she's out playing at recess. He gets a good cry in, but then absolutely nothing else with Big Nick's family is dealt with. Speaking of meandering scenes with Big Nick doing wacky things, there's a couple of scenes where he taunts Merriman and company in public. He squeezes information out of Donnie, and then moronically shows up to crash dinner in a scene that not only burns an informant, but also adds little besides introducing a one-up pissing contest between Nick and Merriman. There's another scene where he goes into a shooting range that Merriman and friends are hanging out at. They're just minding their own business, and Nick shows up to shoot, and then Merriman wordlessly ones up Nick by firing a lot of bullets in succession, then leaving, so then Nick checks his sheet, and they were all center shots. Is this supposed to be badass or something? Make me go, oh man, this rivalry is getting hot. Well, I don't. It makes me think Big Nick is a self-absorbed macho idiot and makes Merriman look like a loser for falling for this pissing contest that is clearly beneath him. Speaking of Donnie and Merriman, this is where I'm going to get into that character I told you to put a pin in earlier. The former is set up as a humble bartender who gets caught up in the gang for financial reasons, and after being tortured by Big Nick, is the heart and soul of the movie. Except we need him to be the secret mastermind in a last-minute twist, so he just sort of falls into a minor supporting role in the second half. Sleight of hand, so we'll be surprised and kick ourselves that we forgot this character who was kind of important at the beginning was the one we were supposed to be keeping our eye on all along, and because he was the one we were supposed to keep our eye on all along, he spent that time that the movie put him to the side, putting the last machinations of his plot in play while we were watching Merriman. But unfortunately, his character is a lot less relatable after he's revealed to be a secret genius, and this reveal makes the mystique surrounding Merriman to be hollow. I'm not sure how smart he really is, and how much of that was Donnie, and I have questions as to the sequence of events which led Donnie to meeting Merriman. Was Donnie wanting Merriman's gang to use as a way of pulling off this long-planned job? Was Merriman's gang the first chance he had? Did Donnie know the guy who introduced him to Merriman would introduce him to a smart gang leader? And so he just got on his good side, playing the nice bartender? What happened to the guy who introduced Donnie to Merriman? He said he wanted to get out while he was still ahead, but Merriman convinced him to stay on for the job, so did he die? The movie doesn't make any of this clear enough. The editing gets really sloppy and loses its grasp on a lot of the details that make these sorts of meticulous master plan heist thrillers work. The movie comes across like its usual suspect ending is enough to make up for these shortcomings, and I don't think those involved intended for it to end up this way, but the messiness cannot be understated. Let's go back to Merriman. There's a sequence where Big Nick goes to a strip club, gets comfortable with one of the strippers, takes her home, only for it to be revealed that this is Merriman's gal. But then it's revealed that Merriman set this whole thing up so Big Nick would tell Merriman's wife / girlfriend / friends with benefit every detail about the cops' plan in regards to how they're going to deal with Merriman's heist, and in turn, Merriman's wife / girlfriend / friend with benefits tells Merriman all that she knows. This whole scenario is really convoluted and dumb. So A, Big Nick knew this was Merriman's wife / girlfriend / friend with benefits? Or did he not know that until the morning? Or was that a detail that came up during the night? Because he's approached by this woman and doesn't seem to know who she is. And in the morning, he has a look on his face that says, "Ha ha, I had sex with your woman." Did he recognize her from those 2-second reaction shots in the scene where he confronted Merriman and friends in the restaurant? Also, if he did know this was Merriman's wife / girlfriend / friend with benefits, why tell her all that information? B, I don't know who this woman is. Is this woman the one who can be seen in the background of scenes with Merriman and as Merriman's arm candy? Is she also one of the women from the awkward restaurant scene? Either way, if she is, we were never getting a good look at her, let alone a meaningful exchange of dialogue to establish this character. This woman is a random addition to the camp of important pieces in the story. C, so Merriman knew that Big Nick was at a strip club, which also just happened to be the one his wife / girlfriend / friend with benefits worked at, or did she go undercover? I don't know who this character is, so it could be anyone's guess. And he just knew that he'd go home with her and that he'd tell her all the information he needed? This is ridiculous. Okay, to rag on some light criticisms, I got to say that I think Jackson 50 Cent Curtis has the potential to deliver a great performance someday. He is a jacked, big dude who is kinda soft-spoken. There's something there, but it's just not here. I had a hard time understanding him in a lot of his scenes. He talks under his breath and quickly. He sounds confused much of the time, and there's a scene where he meets his daughter's prom date that relies on physical comedy, and he's so stiff and awkward. The big ending foot chase and shootout feels like an underwhelming way to end the movie after a good heist. The terrain isn't particularly interesting, and the direction is a far cry from the hostage situation and the Federal Reserve heist. But this is also where things get lost in the shuffle. Donnie goes undercover as a Chinese food delivery boy and uses this as a way to make an escape from the Fed. Once the woman he delivers to seems to think there's something up when the food she eats isn't good and calls the front desk just as Donnie leaves, telling security to catch him. But then nothing comes of this. It feels like it was a subplot cut for time, and if that was the case, then cut after they taste the days-old food as a comedic payoff beat. No need to add, "Is security going to catch him?" stuff if nothing is going to come of it. How is Donnie able to get out of the handcuffs? Donnie using a diversion garbage truck and his scheme working as a way for him to be the sole person with the money is a victory purely out of coincidence. What if Big Nick and his crew didn't catch up to Merriman and arrest Donnie? Was the Hawaiian guy in on Donnie's scheme? I don't know. This all becomes so vague and is the product of poor editing. How about we don't make Donnie some mastermind criminal and this all goes down in a much more linear fashion? That would make all of this much, much better. I've napped this for far, far too long on a movie review that nobody's going to watch, so I'll wrap it up. Den of Thieves is a film that's just too ambitious for its own good. I think I'd call it bad, but I feel bad doing so because it does try to have some virtue, and the direction makes this sloppy mess of a story go down much smoother than it could have. But I cannot give this any more than a 4 out of 10. Last week, I described the then upcoming movie Forever My Girl as something along the lines of the latest installment in romance movies with a life-threatening illness at the center. Well, that was entirely incorrect. I say this because until I was writing last week's episode and was looking up this week's release, I hadn't even heard of this movie. I asked my brother, since he works at a theater and sees more trailers than I do, if he knew what this movie was, and he ended up getting this confused with a movie coming out in March called Midnight Sun. The real gist of Forever My Girl is that Alex Rowe's budding country music star Liam Page and Jessica Roth's Josie are getting married, but Liam leaves her at the altar. 8 years later, Liam Page is now a country music superstar man-child who returns to his hometown for the first time since he left his bride-to-be after one of his high school friends is tragically killed in a drunk driving accident. Once he's back, he tries to reconnect his relationship with his father, who's also the town preacher, and his former fiancée Josie, as well as meet the 7-year-old daughter he didn't know he had. Forever My Girl is a terrible movie. Its leading characters are blank, hollow, and archetypical as they come. There's barely a plot because this is a character-centric story without much in the way of characters, and the pace is glacially slow as it's trying to be about two people falling back in love in a semi-natural way. There's not much to say here, but the experience of watching Forever My Girl was a baffling and thoroughly perplexing one. Right off the top, I've seen this title graphic in iMovie, and the obvious stock footage isn't properly color corrected to match the rest of the movie. Liam Page is a hunky, all the ladies love him star, and the film makes a point to have him awoken by a groupie who's not in bed with him in the morning. Whenever people drink out of alcoholic beverage bottles, there's never so much as the corner of a label pointing towards the screen, and when Liam returns home, scenes with his preacher father delivering sermons linger for a few minutes. See where I'm going with this? Then I remembered all the Pure Flix movie trailers I saw before seeing this, and it hit me. Is this a secret faith-based movie? Well, I've seen the thing, and I don't know. That was easily the most entertaining thing about watching this movie. The film displays wholesome, middle American, conservative, traditional values, features multiple scenes where the pastor delivers sermons for a few minutes. There's no swearing of any kind. There's montages accompanied by soft Christian country rock. There's nothing entirely wrong with any of this. All audiences deserve to have their market. But I was blindsided, and it was bizarre. But at the same time as all this, there's implied alcoholism, explicit alcohol consumption, children born out of wedlock, and other things you wouldn't see in a straight, faith-based movie. The movie's obviously low budget, and it definitely shows at times, but it doesn't look that cheap. This movie had me guessing all the way through. So at the very least, there was that. On to an actual critique. As for the positives, I guess Alex Rowe and Jessica Roth are doing what they can. Everybody speaks like a Southern American cartoon, and it's evident that nobody making this movie has ever been to the South, but absurd accents aside, they're doing what they can with their material in spite of their mediocre chemistry. Alex Rowe has always reminded me of a discount Nicholas Hoult, but he's not awful, and Jessica Roth was a lot of fun in Happy Death Day. Yeah, that's about all I have in regards to some positives. Right from the get-go, the dialogue is really bad. How many times do we need to establish through the most ham-fisted of dialogue that Liam Page has a popular song on the radio? Everybody thuddingly explains their minds throughout. It's all so uninteresting. We just go from scene to scene where people seem to talk just to get out of the scene they're in and get to the next. The acting can also be rough. There's an extra who works at a register at a supermarket who delivers her lines with such a flatness I was dumbfounded, and the little girl was grating on the nerves as she shifted between her only 3 gears. What am I doing? I'm going for the easy targets, pointing at the acting and going, oh, it can be so bad, and pointing at the dialogue and going, oh, it's so bad. But that's all there really is, since there's nothing much here, and what is here is so passive and easy to mock because it's melodrama, and not very good melodrama at that, because I don't connect with any of these characters. They're lame, their relationship is so cliche down to the detail that he was a football player and she was a cheerleader, and he gets accepted for his abandoning of the people in his life so quickly and without any long-lasting consequences. The movie lets him off the hook so easily, and the title is Forever My Girl. Kind of makes this whole thing creepy in a way that's like, hey, I can treat you as poorly as possible, but it's okay because you'll always love me no matter what. Speaking to that point, There's a bit of Chekhov's phone message here. Liam has a voice message on an old taped-together, dilapidated phone that he's held onto because of the message, and the movie holds off on telling you about the contents of the message. Josie tells Liam about the message since she doesn't know about his keeping the phone, and once we finally hear the message for ourselves, it doesn't matter because she already told us basically verbatim the contents of that message. How do you botch a payoff like that? Also, I don't buy that Liam would keep that phone or that message for that long after learning about the kind of jerkface he became when he left Josie for fame 8 years ago. Forever My Girl feels really neutered. This feels like a PG-13 screenplay that got funded by a Christian, faith-based distribution company that required a trimming down to a PG rating, saw the footage in editing and trimmed it further down so it would easily get a PG rating. How do you explain scenes like Liam drinking in a bar fade immediately to a couple hours later and his dad is stitching up his hand and saying something along the lines of, "I can't believe you punched that bar mirror," or Liam having all the symptoms of alcoholism but it being addressed a total of 0 times? Forever My Girl is a really bad movie that I wouldn't recommend to anybody. It's so inoffensive, so made for everybody that it's made for nobody. I didn't hate the movie, and my experience of watching the movie was pretty fun, but I can't give this any more than a 3 out of 10. This weekend at the box office saw Sony's Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle coming in first for the 3rd week in a row, dipping only 30.6% from last week and making $19.5 million in its 5th week. This sequel has made a domestic total thus far of $316.4 million on a $90 million budget. This is a surprise success, and I cannot believe it has remained so popular after being in theaters for over a month. 12 Strong had a second-place debut with $15.8 million, and Den of Thieves trailed just behind in its third-place debut of $15.2 million. These two films are approaching a couple film-going markets that have some overlap, and it's interesting to see them debuting so close together. Steven Spielberg's awards contender The Post dropped to 4th in its second week of a wide release as it widened its rollout by 32 venues. This true story starring Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep earned an additional $11.7 million, dropping a respectable 39.5% from last week. Closing out the top 5 was the Hugh Jackman-led musical The Greatest Showman with $10.6 million. The absurdly small week-to-week drops this film has been enjoying continued as it only dipped 14.6%, bringing its domestic total to just over $113 million. Now that's good word of mouth. The endlessly wonderful Paddington 2 made $8 million in its second week of its North American release, dropping an impressively low 27.2% from last week's underwhelming debut. It has so far only squeaked a North American total of $24.8 million, but its abundant success in its home country renders its failure over here moot. By the way, this movie's great and you should see it. America, you should feel ashamed. Liam Neeson action vehicle The Commuter came in 7th this week, dropping from its 3rd place debut last week and dipping an average 51.8%, adding $6.6 million to its total. Star Wars The Last Jedi dropped to 8th, adding $6.5 million to its now over $600 million domestic total. Insidious: The Last Key stayed in the top 10 with a total of $5.8 million. I'm a little surprised to see this movie burning out so quickly, as it's the only horror movie at the multiplexes currently, but it's made a total of $58 million domestically thus far on a $10 million budget, so it really doesn't matter. Making waves in its debut was Forever My Girl. It opened in 10th place with $4.2 million. I can't say I'm at all surprised by this. I generally keep my ear close to the ground for releases, and I hadn't even heard of this movie until last week. I never saw so much as a trailer, so it's no wonder nearly nobody came out to support it. Well, everybody, that'll about do it for me today. Next week, the only movie I'll be discussing is the 3rd installment in the post-apocalyptic sci-fi series based on young adult novels, Maze Runner: The Death Cure. Also coming out in a wide release is the new Scott Cooper film Hostels, starring Christian Bale, which I will not be reviewing since it is technically a 2017 movie. Sorry about the lateness on this one, but until next time, I'll see you at the movies.